Hook the lights snapped on in the conference room, and the cameras whirred louder than any breath I'd ever heard. I stood there, clutching a notebook of undeniable data, as the committee chairman slammed the gavel down and announced my termination, effective immediately. The red badge of whistleblower burned my chest, and the echoing silence that followed was louder than any applause could ever be. I was marched out, no handshake, no pity, just the cold glint in their eyes that said, "You're done." In that frozen hallway, I felt the world tilt. My dream of truth was being crushed, and the only thing left in my throat was the Chinese letter vow to prove them wrong, no matter how far down the rabbit hole I had to go. Painful departure and relentless pursuit, I left the institute with my head hung low and my hands raw from the last documents I'd signed. The smell of polished oak and institutional coffee clung to me as I stepped outside into a rain that seemed to mirror the tearful emptiness I felt. Mushroom madness, my former mentor had called my research, and the scientific community's snickers echoed in my ears. I tried to ignore the laughter, to drown it out with the hiss of a lab fan I'd built in the corner of my grandparents' shed, where I'd stash Petri dishes and bags of mycelium. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the shed became a sanctuary of spores and hope. I spent nights inoculating grain jars, days reading obscure mycology papers that the mainstream dismissed. The humiliation of being called an embarrassment fueled a fire I wouldn't let die. I documented every failed batch, every colony that never blossomed, in a weathered journal that now sits on my kitchen table, its pages yellowed but alive with perseverance. I worked alone, but I wasn't lonely. My fungi were partners, each hyphal filament a silent promise of redemption. Arduous ascension and profound triumph breakthrough came in a place called the Willow Creek Landfill, a scar of blackened earth that had been abandoned for decades. Traditional scientists had labeled it a lost cause, but I saw a canvas of possibility. I inoculated the soil with a bespoke blend of oyster mushrooms, mycorrhizal fungi, and my own patented inoculant. The first day the spores merged, the earth emitted a faint, earthy perfume that smelled like hope. Weeks turned into months. The mycelium spread like veins, breaking down toxic heavy metals, converting petrochemicals into harmless compounds, and knitting the barren soil into a living tapestry. I returned to the site with a small camera, capturing the transformation. Grasses sprouting where nothing had grown for years, birds returning to drink from newly formed water pockets, and the once dead ground now humming with microbial life. The footage went viral, not for the science alone, but for the sheer visual poetry of life reclaiming a wasteland. My work was no longer mushroom madness. It was a blueprint for ecological redemption. The Agronomy Institute, which had once dismissed my data, reached out for collaboration. Environmental agencies invited me to speak at conferences. Most importantly, I founded Mycoremedy Labs, a nonprofit that now restores polluted sites worldwide, employing communities and training the next generation of soil whisperers. Each restored acre became a living testament to the power of persistence, of refusing to let a single betrayal define me. Cathartic return and poetic justice back home, the house that once seemed like a prison now felt like a shrine. My family's eyes had softened over the years, but the memory of that public dismissal lingered like a phantom. When I announced I'd be bringing them to the old landfill, now a thriving forest, I saw the same skeptical wrinkles reappear. The day arrived with a sky that glittered in the late summer sun. I parked my battered pickup at the edge of the reclaimed site and tossed the keys to my mother. "You're coming with me," I said, voice steady. Her hands trembled as she stepped onto the pathways I'd forged, the grass beneath her feet still tender from my early trials. We walked through the transformed landscape together. There, where once there was a dead trench, now stretched a meadow dotted with wildflowers, humming with pollinators. The former groundwater pond, a shimmering black mirror of contamination, now held crystal-clear water where dragonflies danced. My father, who had once called my work ridiculous, placed his hand on a mushroom that pulsed with life, its caps glowing faintly in the late light. Then, as we stood before a massive birch grove that had sprung from my inoculant, I pulled out my phone and replayed the first failed batch we had ever attempted. The grainy footage showed a failed colonization, the soil black and lifeless. I turned the screen toward them. "This," I said, "is the failure that killed your son's confidence. This is the one that made him believe we were all wrong." The silence stretched, thick with the weight of years. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were blind," she whispered. "We thought you'd lose everything. Instead, you gave us everything back: trust, pride, a future that grows in the very soil we once thought hopeless." My father's skeptical grin faded, replaced by a solemn smile. "You proved them wrong, son. Not just for you, but for all the doubters out there. You turned our family's shame into a legacy of healing." The family stood among the thriving ecosystem, the mycelium network beneath their feet, a living ledger of karma, each act of betrayal repaid with restoration, each laugh turned into a chorus of life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold over the reborn land, I felt an overwhelming gratitude. I had been broken once, but I had rebuilt, not just a career, but a promise to honor the earth and those who doubted it. We left the site together, the drive home filled with songs I once thought ridiculous, songs of hope, of growth. As I looked out the window, I saw the fields I'd nurtured stretching endlessly, a living proof that truth, perseverance, and a pinch of courage can rewrite any narrative. The ledger was balanced, the scales tipped in favor of redemption. And with that, I knew my journey would never end. The soil would keep whispering, and I would keep listening.